The body hit the marble floor before anyone in the room had time to breathe. Victor Sobel didn't look at it. He couldn't afford to. Across the long boardroom table, 3 men from the Nakamura group sat watching him with the particular stillness of people who were deciding whether to sign a contract or order a killing. The difference, in Victor's experience, was often just a matter of which option cost less. His lead interpreter, a meticulous man named Frederick, who had worked for the Sobel family for 11 years, was not going to be interpreting anything anymore. The neurotoxin, colorless, tasteless, fast, had done its work in under 4 minutes. Victor's personal physician, who was already kneeling beside the body, looked up and gave the smallest shake of his head. Across the table, the Nakamura delegation had gone very quiet. Their lead man, a compact figure named Hayato, had not moved, but his eyes had shifted to Victor, waiting, assessing. The contract, a logistics agreement worth $230 million that would legitimize 3 of Victor's Vancouver-based holding companies, was supposed to be signed in 20 minutes. The ink was already in the pen. Victor's second-in-command, a Scotsman called Drummond, leaned toward his ear. The backup interpreter was Frederick's contact. No one else in the building reads Japanese at that level. "I'm aware," Victor said. "The Nakamura people have a flight at 6. I'm also aware of that." Drummond straightened up. He had the good sense not to say anything else. The problem wasn't just language. It was credibility. If Victor couldn't hold this meeting together in the next 10 minutes, Hayato and his team would conclude correctly that the Sobel operation was more fragile than advertised. Deals like this didn't just collapse. They turned into leverage. Victor had built half his empire on other people's moments of weakness. He was not interested in becoming one himself. He was still thinking through his options when the service elevator opened at the far end of the hall, and a woman walked in carrying a large insulated bag and a handheld receipt printer. She was somewhere in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, and the kind of round, warm face that belonged in a kitchen or a comedy or a school gymnasium. Anywhere, really, except a room where men were quietly deciding whether to panic. She was wearing black catering trousers and a burgundy polo shirt with the logo of a company called Magnolia Provisions stitched over the breast pocket. She was not small. She moved the way people move when they've learned to take up exactly as much space as they need and not apologize for it. She looked at the room. She looked at the body. She looked at the receipt printer in her hand. "I have a delivery for her." She checked the screen. "Frederick Holt?" Smoked salmon platter, 3 orders of soda bread, and what appears to be a very ambitious cheese board. No one spoke. One of Victor's security men took a step toward her. Victor raised one hand. "Leave her." He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him. Her expression was careful rather than afraid, the face of someone doing a rapid calculation. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clover," she said. "Clover Dunn. Do you speak Japanese, Clover?" She tilted her head. "Why? Because the man who does is no longer available." Victor gestured briefly toward the floor. "And I need someone who can translate a contract negotiation in the next 8 minutes." Clover Dunn looked at the body. She looked at the pen on the table. She looked at the 3 Japanese men sitting across from a room full of people who were very obviously not caterers. "How much?" she said. Victor blinked. It was not the response he'd expected. "I beg your pardon? How much are you paying me to stand in a room full of weapons and translate a contract for people I've never met, for a company I've never heard of, in a building I was not supposed to enter beyond the service corridor?" She set the insulated bag down on the nearest surface. I quoted Magnolia. "Provisions a delivery rate of $42. Whatever this is, it's not $42. Drummond made a sound that might, in a different room, have been a laugh. Victor studied her. 5,000. Cash. Tonight." Clover considered this for approximately 3 seconds. "Show me the contract," she said. She was fast. That was the first thing Victor noticed. He slid the document across the table. 41 pages, dense with legal terminology and interest port access, duty protocols and cold storage licensing. and Clover scanned the first page with the particular focus of someone who was not performing comprehension, but actually achieving it. "This is a logistics agreement," she said. "Yes. These clauses on pages 8 through 12 relate to bonded warehousing. The liability structure in Section 4 is intentionally vague." She looked up. "Do you want me to translate what it says or what it means?" Victor felt something shift in his chest. It was not a feeling he was accustomed to. Both, she nodded and turned to the Nakamura delegation. What came out of her mouth was not hesitant or approximated. It was fluent and confident and precise. The kind of Japanese that carries register, that understands the difference between the formal language of contracts and the slightly warmer register of a negotiation where you want the other side to feel respected rather than processed. Hayato's eyebrows rose a fraction of a centimeter. One of the men beside him exchanged a quick glance with his colleague. Victor watched Hayato's shoulders drop barely. By about 5 degrees, that was enough. The next 40 minutes were the strangest of Victor's professional life, and his professional life included a period in the mid-90s that he did not discuss in polite company. Clover moved through the document sections by section, flagging ambiguities that even Victor's lawyers had apparently missed, translating queries from the Nakamura side with precision. And, at one point, when a specific clause around penalty arbitration hit an apparent impasse, switching briefly into French to consult quietly with one of the Nakamura delegation's own legal advisors, who had been educated in Paris and was visibly relieved to have a language in which he felt fully himself. Victor caught Drummond's eye. Drummond gave a look that meant, "I have no idea either." When the signature page was reached, Hayato looked at Clover for a moment before uncapping his pen. He said something in Japanese. He says, Clover translated, that the Sobel organization is fortunate to have someone who understands the difference between the letter of an agreement and its spirit. "And what did you say back?" "I told him you agreed. I didn't say anything. You were going to." She clicked her receipt printer closed and picked up her bag. "I've been reading rooms since I was 11. It's not a superpower. It's just attention." She was almost at the service elevator when Victor said, "Wait." Clover stopped but didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her expression was polite and complete, the expression of a woman who has somewhere else to be and is choosing, as a courtesy, to delay getting there. "Sit down," Victor said. "I have 4 more deliveries. I'll pay for the deliveries." "You don't know what they cost." "It doesn't matter what they cost." She looked at him steadily. "It matters to the people waiting for them." Victor paused. He was not used to being argued with. He was especially not used to being argued with on ethical grounds by a catering employee in a room where a man had recently died of poisoning. He was finding it unexpectedly clarifying. "Please," he said, 15 minutes. Clover set her bag down again. She sat across from him at the cleared table while Drummond herded everyone else out. The doctor, the security team, the remaining Nakamura advisor who lingered until Drummond gave him a look that communicated a great deal without words. When the room was quiet, Victor poured 2 glasses of water from the carafe on the sideboard and set one in front of her. "How did you learn Japanese?" he asked. "My mother's family is from Hokkaido. I grew up speaking it at home." She wrapped both hands around the glass. "French I learned from my grandmother on my father's side. She was from Shikutimi, and she was very insistent. And the legal terminology? I have a law degree from UBC. I passed the bar exam 4 years ago. She said it the way you say something that should be a source of pride but has become, through repetition and other people's reactions, mostly just a fact. I worked at a firm in downtown Vancouver for 2 years. Corporate law. Then I left." "Why?" She looked at the table for a moment. "Because I was very good at my job and my supervising partner gave every significant file to a man who graduated 2 years after me, 12 spots below me in our cohort. And when I raised it, I was told I needed to work on my, I'm quoting, executive presence." The corner of her mouth moved. "I've thought about that phrase a lot since then. I think what it means is, You don't look like what we imagined when we imagined this. Victor was quiet. Anyway, Clover said, I started the delivery job to pay rent while I figured out my next move. That was 14 months ago. She took a drink of water. I'm still figuring. You flagged 3 structural problems in that contract that my lawyers missed. Your lawyers were looking for what was there. I was looking for what wasn't. That's not a minor distinction. No. She set the glass down. It isn't. Victor turned the pen over in his hand, the same pen that had just signed a $230 million agreement. I have a situation, he said carefully, a complicated one. I have been trying to resolve it for 6 months, and I have not made progress, partly because the parties involved speak 4 different languages and trust no one, and partly because the legal frameworks across the 3 jurisdictions involved are in conflict. Clover waited. I need someone who can sit in rooms and understand what's being said and what's being meant. Someone who is not already known to any of the parties. Someone who can read a contract and tell me not just what it says but where the trap is. He set the pen down. Someone who, as you put it, pays attention. Clover was quiet for a long moment. I'm a delivery driver, she said. You're a lawyer who happens to currently be delivering cheese boards. There's a meaningful difference. There is, he agreed, but I'm not sure it's the one you think. She looked out the tall windows at the Vancouver skyline, the mountains behind the city, the flat grey of the inlet, the lights beginning to come on in the towers as the afternoon tipped toward evening. Victor watched her think. He had negotiated with some of the most strategically sophisticated people on 3 continents, and he recognized the particular quality of someone who was genuinely processing rather than performing deliberation. What are the 4 languages? She asked. Japanese, French, Mandarin, and Ukrainian. She was quiet again. Then, I don't speak Ukrainian. Do you speak Russian? A pause. My roommate in 2nd year was from Kiev. We spoke Russian together when we didn't want our other roommates to understand us. The corner of her mouth shifted again. I'm functional, not fluent. Functional is more useful than you'd think, Victor said. In my experience, fluency makes people overconfident. Functional makes people careful. Clover looked at him then, a direct look, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Why are you telling me this much? Because I need you to understand what you'd be walking into. And what would I be walking into? He met her eyes. Something that matters. Something where the difference between a good translator and a careful reader of rooms is the difference between a deal and a disaster. She picked up her receipt printer and turned it over in her hands. Outside, the city hummed its steady, enormous hum. What are your terms? She said. The first meeting was in a private room at a hotel in Gastown, 3 days later. Victor had told her almost nothing in advance. Deliberate, she understood. A test of whether she could enter a situation cold and orient herself without hand-holding. She wore navy. She had thought about it and decided against anything that read as trying too hard or not. Hard enough. Navy was serious without being aggressive. It said, I am here to work. The room held 6 people when she walked in. 2 were from a Taiwanese shipping consortium whose Vancouver interests were represented by a law firm she had, in fact, appeared before during her 2 years at the bar. 1 was a man she didn't recognize, who turned out to be a Ukrainian intermediary named Bohdan, introduced by Victor simply as an associate. 1 was a French-Canadian notary from Montreal, whose function she spent the first 20 minutes quietly deducing, and 1 was Victor himself, standing near the window in a dark suit, watching the door. When Clover walked in, Bohdan said something in Ukrainian to the man beside him. It was not complimentary. The gist of it was that Victor appeared to have brought his lunch order. Clover set her portfolio on the table, took her seat, and said in Russian, without looking up from her notes, I speak enough to understand the important parts. The silence that followed had a particular texture. She had learned in the last 3 days of preparation that silence was information. This one said, recalibrate. Bohdan stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. A genuine one, the kind that happens when someone surprises you and you respect them for it. From across the table, she heard one of the Taiwanese consortium representatives say something quietly to his colleague in Mandarin. The phrase was something like, "Where did they find her?" Clover didn't translate that one. Some things were better left for the room to hold. The meeting lasted 4 hours. There were 3 separate moments where Clover stopped the proceedings, politely, firmly, with the precise language of someone who knows exactly how much authority she has and is not interested in using more than necessary, to flag a clause that contradicted existing wording, to clarify an ambiguity that had already derailed 2 previous meetings, and, once, to point out to Victor directly, in a quiet sentence in French that only the Montreal notary could follow, that the Ukrainian intermediary's translation of a key term was not wrong, but was strategically chosen to be misunderstood. Victor had absorbed that without expression. When the meeting broke for a 15-minute recess, he came to stand beside her at the coffee station. "How long have you known?" he asked. "About 40 minutes. And you waited." "I needed to be sure." She poured herself a coffee and added cream, deliberately, without rushing. "And I needed to understand what he was trying to achieve. It's not useful to stop a play before you know where it's going." Victor looked at her for a moment. "You could have gone into any firm in the country." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Clover looked at the room through the open door, the polished wood and the careful suits and the language of power that she had always been able to speak, but had never quite been invited to use. "I did go," she said. "They just didn't know what to do with me once I got there." She picked up her coffee. "Ready?" The situation that Victor had described as complicated turned out to be one of those things that, once you looked at it long enough, simplified itself into a series of very clear choices. That was Clover's experience. Anyway, complicated problems were usually just problems where too many people were talking and not enough people were reading. She read. Over the following 6 weeks, she sat in 8 meetings across 3 cities, Vancouver, Montreal, and a brief, unsettling trip to Toronto that she preferred not to think about. She translated, she flagged. She caught in a late-night session over cold takeout containers in a suite at the Fairmont, an arbitration clause buried in a schedule that would have exposed Victor to liability in a jurisdiction where he had no legal standing to defend himself. She had put a yellow sticky note on that page and pushed it across the table to him without a word. He had read it, read it again, set it down, looked at her. "I'm giving you a raise," he said. "You haven't officially hired me yet. I'm remedying that now." She peeled the sticky note off the page and stuck it on the back of her portfolio. "Let's finish the schedule first." There were other moments. A meeting with the Taiwanese consortium's legal team, where the lead negotiator, a sharp woman named Grace, who had spotted Clover's UBC ring across the table, had shifted the conversation into Mandarin and addressed all subsequent questions exclusively to her, a small professional insult to Victor, disguised as a logistical preference. Clover had translated everything faithfully, and then, at the end of the session, said quietly to Grace in Mandarin, "You'll get further with him if you let him think he's driving." Grace had looked at her for a moment, then nodded, once. The next session was significantly more productive. There was also Bodan. Bodan, she had concluded, was not working against Victor so much as he was working for himself. Standard enough, but the specific way he was doing it involved redirecting commission flows through a secondary entity that wasn't disclosed in the primary agreement. It was clever. It was also, she told Victor over coffee one morning, the kind of thing that would unravel badly at the worst possible moment. "He'll deny it," Victor said. "Of course he will." She slid a printed page across to him. She had reconstructed the structure from the contract language and 3 subsidiary filings that were technically public but practically invisible. "But denial requires that the documentation be ambiguous. This isn't." Victor looked at the page for a long time. When he looked up, something in his expression was different. Not warmer, exactly. Victor Sobel was not a warm man in the conventional sense, but there was something in the way he looked at her that had shifted from assessment into something closer to acknowledgement. "What do you want?" he asked. Not, What do you want as payment? What do you want? As though the question had a larger answer than a number. Clover thought about the 2 years at the firm, the files that went to someone else, the phrase executive presence delivered in a tone of apology that was not apologetic at all. She thought about 14 months of insulated bags and receipt printers, and knowing the back corridors of half the glass towers in Vancouver. I want to work on things that matter, she said. I want the version of this job where I'm in the room because of what I can do, not in spite of what I look like. She met his eyes. And I want it in writing. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and turned the document toward himself, pulled a pen from his jacket pocket, and wrote something at the bottom of the page, not the formal contract language, just a sentence. He slid it back to her. She read it. Clover, Dunn, Chief Legal Counsel and Negotiation Advisor, Sobel Group. Effective immediately. She looked up. It'll be a proper contract by Friday, he said. Drummond is already working on it. She looked back at the page. She had been very careful over the last 6 weeks, not to let herself feel anything too specifically. That was a habit she had built over years, useful for a lawyer, useful for a woman, in rooms where feeling too much was used against you. But sitting there in the morning light of a Vancouver coffee shop with a handwritten sentence on a legal document in front of her, the habit failed her a little. Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. She straightened the page and slid it into her portfolio. Outside the window, the mountains were clear against a November sky, the kind of sharp and brilliant blue that only happens after 3 days of rain, when the air is clean enough to see all the way to the things you thought were too far away. We have the Nakamura follow-up at 2, she said. I know. The revised schedule has a gap in Clause 9 that we need to address before then. I know that too. And Bowden is going to push back on the commission structure. Let him. Victor looked at her over the top of his coffee cup. I have a better reader of rooms than he does. Clover allowed herself a small smile, not the kind she used in meetings measured, professional, calibrated, the real one. Yes, she said, you do.